Thank you very much. It's not every day you get the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party as your warm-up act. It's brilliant. So we're going to, thank you for having us. We're going to take the theme of robotics a bit further and also try to bring it perhaps slightly closer to the day-to-day and try to explore a bit about how robotics is impacting the workforce now. I've got a couple of superb experts here to help explore that topic. So we've got Shamus on my left, who is KPMG's Head of Innovation. He has a fantastic job. He gets to scan the horizon and talk to loads of interesting people like Elon Musk and work out what's coming down the track. But he also has the responsibility for applying robotics into our core business at KPMG, so into audit, into tax, and into management consulting. Maybe you shouldn't do that, Shamus. And Brian is the Global Head of Automation for HSBC, one of the biggest global banks. He's running a big program around robotic process automation there. And before that, he did a very similar role at Bank of Ireland. So he's got real hands-on experience of robotics and what it's starting to mean for our work. Okay, so I'm going to start off with you, Shamus, so that's okay. And Tom painted a really kind of slightly scary picture of the future. We surveyed the audience before the conference started about when they thought robotics would start to impact their own organizations. So 20% of people said it's already having an impact. 50% said it either it's not going to happen within 5 years, 10 years, or even never. So there's a slight kind of dichotomy there. What's really going on?
So I've got to start off by, I don't know how many people have read the new book, Utopia for Realists, but in there, they talk about, in that book, they talk about doing a survey, a very similar survey, and asking people if they felt their jobs were worthwhile and whether they could be automated. And 35% of people came back, so kind of similar-ish figure, came back and described their jobs, and I quote, as bullshit jobs, right, which could be automated. And that's just KPMG. So you know, I think, I know. But what's real and what's going on? We look at robotics in kind of three layers, right? We're consultants. We like to have things in threes. Basic robotic process automation, which is basically doing the screen scraping, etc. And you'll have that all in your shared service centers today. Our estimate is there are 3 million of those around in the world at the moment. By 2020, there'll be 10 million. And they're actually just taking away transactional work, etc. Then we kind of go up to pieces around virtual agents. So you'll all have been interacting with virtual agents, I suspect, kind of chatbots, etc. And there's some quite good ones done for HR systems, and you may or may not be using Amelia or one of those things. And then we get onto the true deep learning, neural network, AI type systems, which we're already building into audit and tax. So I'm a popular guy amongst the accountants, I have to tell you.
Yeah, sure, yes, very good. We'll come back to those in a second, Shamus. I'm going to Brian. So you mentioned RPA, robotic process automation, and that's really your bag, right, Brian? So what's it mean and what's happening?
Yes, so I'm going to bring it right down into the weeds of just day-to-day what we do and the boring level one, right? So robotic process automation, I'm sure many of you have heard the term. It's probably only about 2 or 3 years old as a term, really. And essentially, it's software that we can configure to essentially replicate what people do every day. We can do it very efficiently and very easily. And the type of activity that we use RPA for, as you said, is the basic transactional activity. Simple things like opening accounts, fraud monitoring, onboarding staff, when we deal with HR operations. And so lots of different standard operations today that we have lots and lots of people doing that activity. The interesting thing about it is, in terms of the business case and the benefits behind it, it typically starts in most companies with the idea of cost reduction. So everybody's going, I've got 50 people doing something here, and I want to reduce that cost. And through RPA, I'll naturally reduce the number. I mightn't have 50 people now. I might have 10 people and some robots. What I found in the companies I've been involved in and other companies I talk to is that it's as much about customer experience improvement and also risk reduction. So, you know, you can now open an account in 2 minutes because the robot's doing it, as opposed to something that needs to go to a different department and somebody needs to check some documentation, and then it's 2 days later your card gets sent out in the post or whatever. Now, obviously, you can deal with all these different systems, you can make those decisions, and you can do it all pretty instantly. So massive opportunity to improve customer experience. On the risk side, in a previous role, we did a lot of automation in financial reporting, and it was regulatory reporting. And the argument there was, it wasn't about cost reduction or reduction in staff, it was about taking the hands and the fingers out of data transfer so that you improved your accuracy. Less mistakes, less rework, less financial fines, less regulatory fines, etc. So it was down in those practical day-to-day transactions, as I said, moving beyond just cost reduction into these other areas.
Very good, thank you. We'll come back a bit to explore the impact on the workforce, I think, around that. But Shamus, you mentioned a couple of other types of robotics, machine learning, cognitive, and Tom was talking about Elon Musk connecting brains up. You know, if
neural thread, yeah.
Yeah, if Charles Darwin was standing here, he might be, I don't know if he was turning in his grave, but he'd be thinking about maybe the next evolution of people is coming. Can you talk about those other bits?
Yeah, so let me start with the neural thread thing, just because it's quite interesting. And but Ray Kurzweil, and most of you, I suspect, don't know who Ray Kurzweil is, but he's a futurologist, and he's, over the last 30 years, been predicting the future. He has an 85% hit rate, and is Google's futurologist now. And he talks about, by 2035, that the neural threads will exist. So it's not a massive surprise that Elon Musk has decided to invest. By the way, he said by 2035, we'll only have one government in the world as well. So I think Tom's out of a job as well as us consultants. But if you look at the things which are going on today in terms of artificial intelligence, I'll give you a couple of examples. You may or may not have seen that BlackRock have decided to replace some of their fund managers yesterday, their active fund managers yesterday, with AI systems. Because they can deliver the thing cheaper, and actually the quality goes up. So remove humans and put AI systems in place. I drive a Tesla, needless to say, as head of innovation, and all Teslas made from October last year have additional cameras and radars in, more than they did before, and by Christmas this year, they will have the ability to be level 5 autonomous, right? You can't get any more autonomous than that. Now, the regulators will have to try and keep up, and I sit on the Parliamentary Committee for AI, and it's one of those things, can the regulators keep up? In the firm, we're spending $100 million a year on artificial intelligence globally. But let me give you one use case, which is we're doing in the UK at the moment. And when your companies send in your accounts to one of the big four, what we do is we give our junior staff the laborious task of going through your accounts and making sure they're compliant and they meet IFRS standards and the Companies Act or the GAAP, etc. And that's a hellishly boring process. And in fact, 2% of the workforce in the UK do that all the time. And so we got those people, we've got a small number of people to do that in a way which a machine can understand. So you could can you annotate when you find the Companies Act requirement for risk X in the accounts? And we got them to do that for 2 weeks, and we then put it into one of our AI systems, and we trained it. And it took 45 minutes to train, but we got to 73% quality in 45 minutes. Now, to go from 73% to 93%, which is where the humans are at the moment, will take us an additional 6 months or 9 months of training, but then that's 2% of the workforce we don't need. To be fair, the graduates can't stand doing the work, so they're happy to go. But we're 186,000 people around the world, and you're going to go, that's 2% dealt with. What's the next use case? So they're very real, and they're here now. And if you drive one of the new Teslas, you're using them. If you have an iPhone and it's monitoring, looking at the photos of your phone and reorganizing them, it statistically can be better at reorganizing your photographs than you can. So just get over it. The AI system is better than you on your phone, right?
No, surely not. I'm fascinated by the idea of all the heads of L&D in the room thinking about their jobs going to start to include learning and development for robots coming in the future.
Yeah, well, they'll be training those, right, exactly. Yeah. You're all safe, it's fine.
Brian, as you've gone in to implement RPA, robotic process automation, to a couple of big banks, what's the impact been on the workforce, the people who were there? You know, think about training, career paths.
Yeah, so there's a couple of areas. I mean, one, Shamus just alluded to, which is that, you know, when I look across our operations, we have lots of people, you know, good degrees, MBAs, banking degrees, etc., and their initial job is processing data, moving things from one system to another, something that we can easily automate. And so really the first thing that you see is where I've seen this implemented, you really are genuinely freeing up people to do a more interesting, more valuable job, whether it's dealing with the kind of more difficult cases, the high-end exceptions, etc. So typically where we've seen RPA put in place, it isn't doing the complete job, it's doing a portion of that role. It's doing the kind of the easier activities, the more mundane activities, and allowing people to use their judgment and their skills, the more complex things. The second thing is about new types of jobs. We heard about new types of jobs. So we have a new type of job now, which is essentially a robot trainer, right, for argument, call it that role. But it's people who can configure robots to do the type of work that they used to do. I had just one guy back in my previous job at the Bank of Ireland. We had a whole area of direct debit transactions. There was a team of about 30 people, and one guy from that team learned how to, you know, configure robots, and he was the guy that then trained the robot to do the job he used to do. So, you know, the configuration work in robotics is actually quite simple. It's not rocket science. It doesn't require high-end software engineering skills. Yeah. The most important person in the role is somebody who understands the process, from the customer through to the end point of whatever that process is. So we're creating these new roles for staff previously in operational activities to become the people who will train and master the robots of the future, if you like. And then the third aspect is managers and leaders. So, you know, we're essentially introducing a new type of labor into the organization. It's a digital labor. And as a manager, as an operational manager, I might in the past had onshore staff, I might have contract staff, I might have outsourced activities, I might have offshored activities, and now I've got some of those activities done by robots. And they're all the same type of activity, and I just need to know how to manage and dial up and down. Actually, I was using the analogy one day with somebody of a graphic equalizer, and someone said to me, you know, dialing up and down the robots, and someone said that's showing your age. I was thinking, oh, they don't have those anymore, no? So it's really is, you know, there's a role that we need to train up, our operational managers at the moment, they need to understand how to manage technology as much as they do understand how to manage people and the processes that they currently do. And
just a quick follow-up on one of the things we often hear when we talk to HR professionals about robotics is if we take away a lot of the sort of entry-level or lower jobs through automation, how are people going to learn through their careers and get to the more sophisticated things? So, and have you come across that kind of challenge yet?
It was funny, I was thinking about that yesterday because it's the old kind of apprentice, like, you know, it's like, I used to always, you know, if you think about football, and I don't know if they still do it, but I know there's some sports guys talking later on, but I was thinking, you know, footballers, if you've got a 16-year-old super striker, do you really want him cleaning the boots? Is that how he learns his trade? Or do you want to bring him in and figure out how he can score goals pretty quickly, right? So, you know, maybe that old, you know, I'm no philosopher on this, but maybe that old idea of bringing people in and getting them to clean the boots as their first job and learn their trade is maybe not what you need to do. You get smart kids, great skills, great talent, great education. Do I really want them typing data from one system to another, or do I want to employ them in a way that's going to be extra value for the business?
I mean, I think I completely agree with that. And Richard and Daniel Susskind, who Tom was talking about earlier on, write about exactly this. And they talk about this is a training problem. It's not a, you know, and if you're going to remove a load of grunt work, I'm not quite sure why we get our graduates to do grunt work anyway. But I think there's also a bigger issue which we as an industry talk about, which is if we start changing the way we produce accountants, which doesn't really bother me much, but it bothers the accountants. The accountants then go off and become finance people in everybody's businesses here. So we're a feeder into other businesses, right? Yeah. So we have a by default an industry societal role, right? And that's again being discussed at the APPG around. Well, you know, who's going to fill that if we don't need as many accountants, but we still need finance people across the piece?
Very good. Okay. And just very quickly, and then we're going to just pause and have questions for the last 4 or 5 minutes. There's a large contingent of HR professionals in the room. Any particular advice or suggestions for the HR community around how they might be thinking about either robotics in their own function or impact on the workforce, which obviously they have a very big interest?
Yeah, so I think there's two things, and I less so at HSBC, but certainly in the Bank of Ireland and previous companies, I've worked very closely with some HR on some HR projects. Two things. One is clearly HR operations, shared services. There's an awful lot of activity there that it's a perfect use case for robotics and RPA, and you know, I think it's just increasingly will be arriving at your door if it's not already there, and it's a great opportunity to improve the customer experience, that internal customer experience that you deliver. But the second thing, and I don't have an answer to this other than what I see is probably the hardest, where most companies struggle with introducing robotics and robotic process automation and AI, I think, into their organizations, is not the technology. As I said, the technology is quite easy. It's how do you embed it in an organization? How do you change the behavior of operational managers and leaders to understand that they're responsible for this new type of workforce? Yeah, that's the bigger challenge. Does HR have a role in that? I don't know. It's part of changing the operational structure, the organizational structure and roles and responsibilities that people have. So I suspect for some technology-minded HR people, there is a role there in that process.
Very good. Okay, Katie.
We're running very short time. Just want to ask very quickly, certainly for the audience here, how do you see, and it follows off your previous comment about how does HR, because you're quite technical people is what I'm sensing here, is how does HR make this work? Because technically, it's easy in your mind. It's no problem, right?
Yeah.
It's no problem.
So, can I have a go at that? Is that all right?
Sure.
I think HR has obviously two roles. One, to use it, the AI systems themselves, but also help workforce plan the future. And I think workforce planning, your organization's view of how it will roll through the next 4 or 5 years is important. I would say that the biggest issue for HR is going to be about data and the quality of data. Because if you use, and I'm sure your organizations are all perfect, but if you use historic data around promotions, for example, to try and look for the next person to be promoted, and you train an AI system, you're entraining all your unconscious bias from history into that AI system, and it will carry on that unconscious bias. So the making sure the data is clean, even if you're not going to do any AI systems for the next 12 months, start thinking about the data you start collecting, and is it clean data which will remove unconscious bias and allow it to be put into training systems. So I think that's the most important thing message I'd give HR people.
Okay, all right, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.